Okay, imagine this. A contract is signed, a promise is made, and then, boom, it's broken. Now, we all kind of know the party at fault has to pay up, right? But what happens when the losses start to spiral? When one tiny breach causes this massive cascade of problems, like a whole line of dominoes toppling over. Where do the courts actually draw the line on who's responsible for what?
So that's the big puzzle we're going to tackle today. And it's a super practical question that you might face if you've ever signed a lease, hired someone for a job, or even started a new one. I mean, if someone breaks their promise to you, are they really on the hook for every single bad thing that happens afterward, no matter how wild or unpredictable? There's got to be a limit, right?
And that's our mission in this explainer, to find that limit. We're going to figure out the exact legal principle that judges use to decide which losses you can get money for and which ones are considered, well, too remote to be the other person's problem.
And to do this, we're taking a pretty cool approach. We're actually going to work through a real question from a contract law exam. Think of it like a detective story. We're going to look at all the possible answers to figure out not just what the correct test is, but also why all the other theories that sound plausible just don't hold up in the real world.
So let's start our investigation. We're going to begin by looking at the ideas that, seem to make sense on the surface, but that the law is actually rejected for some really solid reasons. Let's bust some myths.
All right, our first theory up. This one sounds simple enough. Maybe the only thing that really matters is whether the loss can be measured in dollars and cents. Is that the test? Could it be that easy?
The idea we're testing here, straight from our source material, is just this: whether the loss is of a monetary nature.
And right away, we see this is one of those things that's true, but it's not the whole story. I mean, of course, for a court to give you damages, the loss usually has to be financial. You get money to make up for your money losses. But this rule doesn't actually help us solve our puzzle. It doesn't tell us which financial losses are fair game and which ones are just too far out there. Okay, so if it's not just about the money, maybe it's simpler. What about pure cause and effect? If the breach caused the loss, you pay. That sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? This next option suggests the test is exactly that, whether the loss was actually caused by the breach of contract. This is basically the but-for test. But for the breach, the loss wouldn't have happened. Now, what's so interesting here is that causation is absolutely a piece of the puzzle. The breach has to have caused the loss. The problem is that chain of causation can go on forever. A supplier delivers one faulty screw, which leads to a factory shutdown, which leads to a missed shipment, which leads to a lost client, which leads to the company going bankrupt. See the problem? A simple causation test is way too broad. It doesn't give us a logical place to stop. Okay, so this leads us to our third and honestly our most tempting wrong answer. If that endless chain is the problem, maybe the answer is to say the loss has to be directly connected to the breach. No weird detours, no long, crazy chains of events. Or whether the loss is directly related to the breach of contract. And you got to admit, this one feels right. It just seems to make common sense. And with this one, we are getting so much closer. The idea is on the right track. But here's the thing. The word direct is a little fuzzy, legally speaking. What seems direct to me might feel totally indirect to you. The law needs a standard that's a bit more objective, something more predictable than that. So while it's pointing us in the right direction, it's not quite the final answer. So let's make the big shift. We've seen that looking backward from the loss to try and trace the cause just isn't enough. The real legal test does something totally different. It stops looking backward and it starts looking forward. It's not about causation, it's all about predictability. And this comparison just lays it out perfectly. On the one hand, all the ideas we just busted, they focus on that messy chain of events after the contract was broken. It's a backward-looking mess. But the correct test, reasonable foreseeability, is totally different. It creates a clean cutoff point in time by asking one simple question: what was predictable way back at the beginning, before the contract was even signed? And that, right there, brings us to the answer we've been looking for. The true legal standard, the one courts have used for over 150 years, is called the foreseeability principle. So here it is, the moment of truth. The legal test is whether the loss was reasonably foreseeable at the time the contract was made. Let's really chew on that for a second, because both parts are absolutely crucial. It has to be reasonably foreseeable, and the specific moment we care about is at the time the contract was made. So what in the world does reasonably foreseeable actually mean? Well, it's an objective test. It's not about what you personally predicted. It's about what a hypothetical, reasonable person standing in the shoes of both parties could have predicted was a likely result of a breach. Right at that moment, they were shaking hands on the deal. For instance, if a caterer doesn't show up to a wedding, it's reasonably foreseeable that the couple will have to pay a ton extra for a last-minute replacement. That's a likely outcome. But it's probably not reasonably foreseeable that the best man, so upset about the lack of mini quiches, misses his flight to a huge job interview the next day. That's just too remote.
And this timeline, this might be the biggest takeaway of the whole explainer. It shows exactly why that specific moment in time is so important. The court doesn't ask what was foreseeable when the promise was broken or when the damage was discovered. No, they essentially get in a time machine and go all the way back to the moment the contract was signed. That is the only window that matters. What did the parties know, or what should they have known right then and there?
And why is this the rule? Well, at the end of the day, it's all about fairness. It stops someone from getting slammed with liability for some crazy, out-of-the-blue outcome they never could have imagined, that whole cascade of dominoes we talked about. It also pushes people to be honest up front. If you're in a special situation where a breach could cause a massive, unusual loss, this rule gives you a big incentive to tell the other person about it from the very beginning. It just creates a more predictable world for everyone trying to do business. So it turns out the law of remote damages isn't some dusty old legal puzzle after all. It's a really practical tool, and it's all based on one powerful question. The next time you sign an agreement, just take a second and ask yourself, if this all goes wrong, what kind of loss is a likely predictable result? Because in the eyes of the law, what was once foreseeable can easily become your future responsibility.